It is my distinct honor and a pleasure for me to introduce Arun Gandhi, a fellow countryman from India and the grandson of the world-renowned Mahatma Gandhi, the father of modern India. Employing nonviolent disobedience, Mr. Gandhi led India to independence and inspired movement for civil rights and freedom across the globe, including Martin Luther King's civil rights movement in the United States. Like his grandfather, Arun Gandhi, an author and socio-political activist, has devoted and dedicated his life to the pursuit of nonviolence despite the prejudice, hostility, and discrimination he endured early in his life. Mr. Arun Gandhi was born in Durban, South Africa on April 14, 1934. As a person of Indian heritage, Arun's childhood days in South Africa's apartheid were difficult and dreadful. He was demeaned by Europeans for not being white and abandoned and alienated by African for not being black, and subject to racially motivated violence from extremists in both groups. From 1946 to 1948, Arun lived in India with his grandfather, Mahatma Gandhi. During these 2 years, Arun experienced firsthand the turbulent period of India's history to free itself from the British tyranny and British rule. These events and his grandfather's teaching strongly influenced and shaped Arun's perspectives on the significance of nonviolence in the resolution and management of conflict. After the assassination of his grandfather, Mahatma Gandhi, in 1948, Arun decided to be guided by the principles of his grandfather and dedicate his life to ending senseless violence and to defending those whose human rights are threatened. In 1956, Arun returned from South Africa to India to spread his father's ashes on the river Ganges. While in India, Arun was hospitalized and decided to marry Sunanda, his nurse. That's the best way to get married, especially when you're in hospital. Since the apartheid government denied Sunanda entry into South Africa because of her color, her creed, her religion, or who she was, the couple stayed in India, and Arun became a journalist for the Times of India. In 1987, Arun and his wife moved to the United States to work at the University of Mississippi on a study examining the types of prejudice that existed in India, the United States, and South Africa. Afterward, they moved to Tennessee and founded the M.K. Gandhi Institute for Nonviolence, dedicated to applying the principles of nonviolence locally and globally. In 2007, after the passing of his wife, the Institute moved to Rochester, New York, and is currently located on the University of Rochester campus. He's here to speak to us tonight about the lessons of nonviolence learned from his grandfather, Mahatma Gandhi, and to analyze how we can apply those lessons to the resolution of conflict in the 21st century. I'm proud to present Arun Gandhi. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Rai, Dr. Islam, and friends. It's a great pleasure to be here this evening and to share with you some of my understanding of my grandfather's philosophy. I know everybody today is exasperated with all the conflicts that we face in our lives, in spite of the fact that scholars and statisticians tell us that we are living in much more peaceful times. But I don't see peace anywhere. I see a lot of conflict and a lot of pain and a lot of agony. And I think it's largely because we really don't understand what we mean by peace. We assume that peace is the absence of war or the absence of violence. And once war is ended or if violence has been reduced, we think that we have achieved peace. Well, I don't think that is true peace. Neither did my grandfather think that it is true peace. The other tragedy is that we have come to believe that nonviolence is a strategy to be used when convenient or discarded when not. And I don't think nonviolence is a strategy. Nonviolence has to be lived. We have to make it a part of our lives. And I came to these conclusions after living with my grandfather as a little boy and learning some lessons from him. Now, I'm not going to claim that I was a very bright young 12-year-old boy to understand all those profound philosophy. But grandfather had a way of teaching which made an impact on me, and those lessons remained in my mind. And as I grew up and began to reflect on them, I realized how important those lessons were. And I realized how important his philosophy is for us today. If we understand it properly and are willing to implement it wholly with proper understanding. As you were told in the introduction, I grew up in South Africa and became a victim of prejudices there, just as my grandfather became a victim of prejudices when he went to South Africa as a young lawyer. And it was that incident when he was thrown off the train because of the color of his skin that transformed his life and gave birth to the philosophy of nonviolence. And in a sense, it was a similar incident that took me to grandfather at the age of 12. And I was taught a lesson which I think is a very important lesson for all of us to remember and understand. It is about understanding our anger and being able to use that energy constructively and intelligently. He told me anger is like electricity. It is just as powerful and just as useful, but only if we use it intelligently. But it can be just as deadly and destructive if we abuse it. So just as we channel electrical energy and bring it into our lives and use it for the good of humanity, we must learn to channel anger in the same way so that we can use the energy intelligently for the good of humanity rather than abuse the anger and cause death and destruction. He suggested that I write an anger journal. He said every time you become angry, don't act on it. Don't say anything or do anything that is going to make a difference in your life. But put it all down in your journal. But write the journal with the intention of finding a solution to the problem, and then commit yourself to finding a solution. Now that is very important, because a lot of people today tell me they've been writing an anger journal for a long time, but it hasn't really helped them. Because every time they go back and read the journal, they're just reminded of the incident and they get angry all over again. Because they pour their anger out into the journal. So it's very important that we write the journal with the intention of finding a solution and then commit ourselves to finding a solution. And I did this for many years, and I must say it helped me considerably in learning how to deal with my anger intelligently and constructively. But after learning this profound lesson, I was 12 years old, and I decided to test grandfather and see whether he himself had learned the lesson or not. And this was the time in his life when he was involved in many important things, not only independence of India, but he was concerned about the emancipation of the Indian women, the education of Indian children, and the emancipation of the so-called untouchable people. And he had programs going on in all these different fields. And of course, all these programs needed funding. And he realized that the easiest way for him to raise the funds he needed was to sell his autograph. And he put a fee of 5 rupees, which in today's currency would be approximately $5 for each autograph. And every morning and evening, when hundreds and sometimes thousands of people assembled for his prayer services, after the prayers, most of them would seek his autograph. And while I was living with him, it was my duty to go out into the audience and collect the autograph books and the money and bring it to him for his signature. And one day I thought to myself, if everybody could get his autograph, why not me? After all, I'm his grandson, and I deserve an autograph too. But I didn't have any money, and so I got myself a little autograph book and I slipped it into the pile, hoping that he wouldn't notice the absence of money. But when he came to that book, he said, "Why is there no money for this autograph?" And I said, "Because it's my book." And he said, "Well, you should know that I don't make an exception even for grandsons. That if you want an autograph, you'll not only have to pay me for it, but you'll have to earn the money and pay me. Don't ask your parents for it." And I said, "No way." He said, "You are my grandfather, and I'm going to make you give me this autograph free." So he laughed and said, "All right, let's see who wins." And from that day, every day when he was in high-level political discussions with Indian politicians or British politicians, I would barge into the room with my autograph book and thrust it in his face and demand an autograph. My logic was that just to get rid of me, he would sign the book and give it to me. But instead, every time I became too boisterous, all he did was put his hands across my mouth, pressed my head against his chest, and went on talking politics. On many occasions, the other politicians used to get exasperated and tell grandfather, "Why don't you give him the autograph? He disturbs the meetings every day." And grandfather would just smile and say, "This is a private joke between the two of us. You don't have to get involved in it." The long and short of it is that he never did give me the autograph. But he never ever told me to get out of the room and leave him alone. As we would do with our siblings or our children, if we are working on something important, we tell them very rudely sometimes to get out of the room. "Can't you see I'm busy just now?" He never ever did that to me. And that's when I realized that if he was able to control his anger to that extent, if we can achieve 50% of it, we would be able to reduce violence very substantially in our lives. Today, experts tell us that more than 80% of the violence that we experience is generated by anger. We get angry and we say things and we do things that sometimes changes the course of our lives completely. But if we learn how to understand that anger and how to channel that energy intelligently, we would be able to reduce all that violence very substantially. So understanding anger and being able to use that energy effectively and intelligently is the cornerstone of his philosophy of nonviolence. And if we don't understand that, we can't really practice nonviolence. But also, when we talk about nonviolence, we need to understand what do we mean by nonviolence. Nonviolence is not just the absence of war or absence of violence in the streets. Nonviolence is about how we behave with each other and how we relate with each other. And unfortunately today, in the kind of materialistic societies that we have built all over the world, we have become greedy. We want everything for ourselves. We don't care about other people. Our relationships with other people are very delicate. And everything about us is very negative. And we need to understand all of these aspects of it. I learned about the breadth and depth of his philosophy of nonviolence one day when I was coming back from school. I had a little notebook and a little pencil in my hands. The pencil was about 3 inches long. And I thought to myself, I deserve a better pencil. This is too small for anybody to use. And without a second thought, I just threw the pencil away because I was so sure grandfather would give me a new pencil when I asked him for one. But that evening when I met grandfather and asked him for a new pencil, instead of giving me one, he subjected me to a lot of questions. He wanted to know how the pencil became small and where did I throw it away and why did I throw it away, and on and on and on. And I couldn't understand why he was making such a fuss over a little pencil until he told me to go out and look for it. And I said, "You must be joking." I said, "You don't expect me to look for a little pencil in the dark?" He said, "Oh yes, I do. Here's a flashlight." And he sent me out with a flashlight to look for this pencil, and I must have spent about 2 hours searching for it. And when I finally found it and brought it to him, he said, "Now I want you to sit here and learn 2 very important lessons. The first lesson is that even in the making of a simple thing like a pencil, we use a lot of the world's natural resources. And when we throw them away, we are throwing away the world's natural resources, and that is violence against nature. And the second lesson is that because in an affluent society we can afford to buy all these things in bulk, we overconsume the resources of the world, and because we overconsume them, we are depriving people elsewhere of these resources, and they have to live in poverty, and that is violence against humanity." And that was the first time I realized that all of these little things that we do every day, consciously and unconsciously, it's become so much a part of our life that we don't even think about it. That every time we waste anything or overconsume something, we are indulging in violence against nature or against human beings. To make me understand this lesson thoroughly, he made me draw a genealogical tree of violence, just as we would do a family tree, with violence as the grandparent, and physical violence and passive violence as the 2 branches. And every day before I went to bed, I had to analyze and examine everything that I experienced during the day. Things that I may have done to other people or people may have done to me, or things that I may have read about. All of these things had to be analyzed and examined and put in their appropriate places on that tree. If it was the kind of violence where we use physical force, like slapping and punching and pinching and fighting and wars and murders and rapes and all of these things that we do to one another where physical force is used, that would go under physical violence. But if it was the kind of violence where we don't use any physical force, and yet we hurt people, directly or indirectly, consciously or unconsciously. And the way I had to determine this was to ask myself, if somebody were to do this to me, would I be hurt by it or would I be helped by it? And if I came to the conclusion that it would hurt me, then that would be passive violence. And when I began to do this introspection, I was amazed that I was able to fill up a whole wall in my room with acts of passive violence. The physical part didn't grow very much, but the passive side just grew endlessly. And then grandfather explained to me the connection between the two. He said, we commit passive violence all the time, every day, consciously and unconsciously, and that generates anger in the victim. And the victim then resorts to physical violence to get justice. So it is passive violence that fuels the fire of physical violence. So logically, if we want to put out that fire of physical violence, we have to cut off the fuel supply. And since the fuel supply comes from each one of us, we have to become the change that we wish to see in the world. Unless we change our attitudes and habits, we will never be able to create peace in the world. We will never be able to put an end to the conflicts that we have in the world. If we have a world where half of the population of the world is living in abject poverty and the other half is living in relative affluence, we're going to have conflicts all the time. And we are taught by politicians and by history that we've got to be patriotic, we've got to be nationalistic, we've got to think about our own country and preserve our own way of life, which is all wrong. Because no country, however powerful and however rich it may be, can preserve its corner of the world if the rest of the world is going down the tube. We may have all the weapons of mass destruction, we may have the strongest army in the world, but if the rest of the world is going down for economic or other reasons, we are going down with them. So the only way any country in the world can preserve itself and preserve its stability and strength is by ensuring that the whole world is stable and strong. And we've got to have that kind of a relationship with the world where we stop exploiting each other and start working cooperatively with each other and trying to enhance their living standards so that we can all live happily together. Peace means harmony. Peace is not about the absence of war, peace is about creating harmony. And the only way we can create harmony is to eradicate the pain that people suffer from. And the only way we can eradicate that pain is by making small sacrifices so that everybody can enjoy a good way of life. So these are things that we need to understand. Our relationships, for instance, interpersonal relationships or international relationships, are based on what's good for us. We are always thinking of what am I going to gain from this relationship? And if I don't gain anything from it, why should I bother to cultivate a relationship? And that is a very negative way of going about building relationships. Our foreign policy of every country in the world is based on what is good for that particular country. And when they look at what is good for them, they are exploiting the rest of the world to grab whatever they want from each other. And that is a very negative way of building a relationship. Grandfather said that in a culture of nonviolence, relationships are built on 4 principles: respect, understanding, acceptance, and appreciation. We have to respect ourselves and respect each other and respect our connection with all of creation, which is very important. Because today a lot of people tell me we are independent individuals and we'll do whatever we like and it's nobody's business. We are not independent individuals. We are interdependent, interconnected, and interrelated, not only as human beings, but human beings with nature. And if we don't respect that, and we will not be able to understand who we are and what we are and why are we here on earth. We are not here by accident. We are not here just to live from birth to death, going around in circles and achieving our ambitions. We are here to contribute to making this society a better place. Each one of us has that role to play. But we are so caught up in our own selfish greed that we have forgotten our role as human beings and how do we create that kind of a relationship. It's when we understand that, then we will be able to accept each other as human beings and not identify people by the labels that we have put upon ourselves. Today we have so many labels to identify people. We have economic labels, religious labels, national labels, you name it, and we have a label. And we identify people only by those labels. We've got to remove all those labels and just begin to love and respect each other as human beings. Whatever our size and color and beliefs and whatever it is, we are all human beings. And it's only when we accept each other as human beings that we will be able to appreciate our own humanity. This is true for personal relationships as well as for international relationships. Then we will be able to create harmony in the world and be able to create peace in the world. Today we spend, all the nations of the world together, spend $17 trillion in building weapons of mass destruction. $17 trillion. My mind can't even imagine the figure. Just to kill each other. And yet if we were able to save 50% of that, I'm not even saying the whole amount, but 50% of that amount, we would be able to repay the debts of the developing countries, and we'll still have more money to ensure that everybody gets a proper house and food to eat around the world. So why are we creating more weapons of destruction and spending all the precious money on killing instead of living and ensuring that everybody lives as brothers and sisters in harmony? These are aspects that we need to think about and ensure in our lives. If we don't do that, we are going to go deeper and deeper into this culture of violence that is like cancer eating away at our insides. Today our nations, our country, our world is suffering from cancer, a cancer that is terminal. And yet we are looking for medicines for headaches. We ought to be doing something drastic to get rid of that cancer, not treat our headache for it. So we have to consider, how do we create that kind of a world? How do we bring difference in our own lives so that we can be better human beings and we can have better relationships? I've been told very often that violence is human nature, that we are born that way and there's nothing we can do to change that. And I disagree with that. If violence was human nature, we wouldn't need military academies and martial arts institutes to teach us how to fight and kill. We should be born with those instincts. But the fact that we need these academies to teach us is an indication that it's a learned experience. But what is natural to human beings is anger. What is not natural in human beings is to abuse the anger. We need to treat that anger intelligently. I use the analogy of electricity to demonstrate this. Just as in an electrical circuit, we have a circuit breaker. To say that there's something wrong in the circuit, then we need to look at it. The same way anger is telling us there's something wrong going on and we need to stop and think about it and look at it and correct it. But instead of doing that, we just abuse anger, we get angry and we lash out and do things that changes the course of our lives completely. So we've got to understand that. But the way we perpetuate violence in society is the way we bring up our children. We use violence in our homes. Every time we punish our children for misbehavior, we are telling them that punishment is right, and that is the basis of violence. We are planting the first seeds of violence in our children. In a culture of nonviolence, there is no room for punishment. We were brought up, my two sisters and I, were brought up in a nonviolent home. My parents believed totally in nonviolence. And when we misbehaved, we were not punished. Our parents did penance. Depending on how serious the offense was, our parents would fast for a day or for 2 days. But they would sit at the table, they would cook and feed us and talk to us, sit at the table and not eat. And they would tell us that they were not going to eat because they were not good parents. They didn't teach us the right way of behavior. And when they did that and took the responsibility on themselves, they taught us a powerful lesson that we didn't ever do that again. We didn't make that mistake ever again. But for that kind of penance to work, there has to be a strong relationship between the parents and the children. A relationship that is based on mutual love and respect. If there is no love and respect, the child will say, okay, you want to fast, go ahead and fast, I don't care. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of relationships in building a culture of nonviolence. We are today dominated by a culture of violence. A culture of violence that has overtaken every aspect of our lives. Our language, our religion, our economics, our entertainment, everything has become violent. And we've got to change that culture of violence to a culture of nonviolence if we want to save this humanity and really create a better world for future generations. I want to conclude now with one final story that my grandfather used to be very fond of telling us, of an ancient Indian king who once became very curious about the meaning of peace. And he invited all the intellectuals in his kingdom to come and explain the meaning of peace. And everybody came there and did their best, but nobody could satisfy the king. And then one day there was an intellectual from another town who came on a visit, and the king asked him the meaning of peace. And he said, the only person who can give you a satisfactory answer is an old sage who lives outside your kingdom. But he is so old that he cannot come to you. You will have to go to him and ask him this question. So the next morning, the king went to the sage and asked him the meaning of peace. And the sage quietly went to the back of the house and came back with a grain of wheat and placed that grain of wheat on the king's palm and said, here is your answer. And of course, the king didn't know what a grain of wheat had to do with peace, and he didn't want to show his ignorance. And so he quietly clutched that grain of wheat and went back to the palace and found a little gold box, and he placed that grain of wheat in the box. And every morning he would open the box to look for an answer, and he couldn't find any answers. And a few days later, when this intellectual came back on a return visit, the king asked him to explain. And he said, it's very simple. He said, as long as you keep this grain of wheat in this box, nothing is going to happen. It will eventually rot and perish, and that will be the end of the story. But if you had allowed this grain of wheat to interact with all the elements, if you had planted this outside in the soil, it would sprout and grow, and very soon you could have a whole field of wheat. And that is the meaning of peace. That if somebody has found peace and if they keep it in their hearts for their own personal gains, it will perish with them. But if they had let it interact with all the elements, it would sprout and grow, and very soon we could have a whole world of peacemakers. So I have come here this evening to give you the grain of wheat that I got from my grandfather, and I hope that you won't let it rot and perish, but let it interact so that all of us together can make this world a better place for future generations. Thank you. You.
Yeah. Good evening, sir. My name is Atul Roy. I teach mathematics at Rockville campus. And it's really unbelievable to see an accomplished, descendants of, whom Einstein described as unbelievable, So I have a history question, not a math question here. And it will be very hard for you to answer probably because you are only 12-year-old. I was interested in knowing about the interactions between, President Roosevelt, FDR, and Mahatma Gandhi. And I found a letter that, in the archives that Bapu wrote to FDR, challenging him to encourage British to leave India. And he even said that you yourselves are not treating the quote unquote Negroes in your country in right way. And once India becomes independent, then their freedom will follow. And that's how confident he was. And FDR took it very seriously. That is, Elliot Roosevelt, I was reading one of his books, and he wrote that once he talked to Churchill about, independence of India, and Churchill got so angry, he just went to bedroom. And all these things were going on, but I don't see much reference of it recorded in history. Do you remember or see anything, or you remember any instances in which these two great people interacted anymore, which is not recorded?
No, I was just 12 years old,
I know,
and at
that's what
12 years old, I don't,
No? Okay.
I don't remember who he wrote to and what he wrote about.
No, but
I heard about this incident also, just like you, when I grew up and read the history books. I read about that. But yeah, I do know that he had some other dialogues also, which I have heard about. When the British said that if we leave India as it is, as one country, then there'll be a lot of strife between the Hindus and the Muslims. And therefore, we need to be here, or we had to at least divide the country and give the Muslims a country of their own. And my grandfather said, that is not your business. Just like in the United States, they fought a civil war, and then at the end of it, they decided that they had to live together. We will fight a civil war here, we'll kill each other, and at some stage, we will gain our sense and stop fighting and learn to live together. But that is our problem, and you should leave it to us to solve it. But the British didn't want to do that, and they divided the country, and now we are perpetual enemies.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yes.
Good evening, Mr. Gandhi. Thank
Good
you
evening.
so very much for passing on this piece of wheat to us. I'm a school teacher, and I'm very interested in preserving the enthusiasm that our young people enter the early grades with. And sometimes the challenge to keep peace within the classroom is a little difficult for me. So can you suggest ways in which we can preserve the enthusiasm that our young people have when they first enter school? And I'm talking elementary. But by the time they get, into the later years, I don't know if we happen as a school teacher. I'm not sure what happens, but how can we preserve that enthusiasm so that our classrooms can be bastions of peace?
Well, I know it's a very difficult problem, and I see this more and more with my great-grandchildren now, who are so full of energy. And one of the things that I come to the conclusion about is that we have so much of fortified food for the children. We've pumped them up with so much of vitamins and all kinds of fortified food. And then we don't give them the means to physically get it out of their system. They're sitting all day in classes or doing a sedentary kind of work there. So, we are to blame for it partly that, we shouldn't be giving them all that fortified food, or we should give them the means to get it out of their system physically. And then they can pay more attention to what is going on. But it is a difficult problem, and looks like on this side nobody wants to ask a question.
Thank you for talking with us and giving us this lecture. First of all, I wanted to say what an awesome testimony for all the stories that you gave. And my question now is violence a necessity to society? Because with violence, hate, and greed, we can appreciate peace, and therefore making it more deep like the yin and yang.
Well, I don't think we need to have violence to be able to appreciate peace. I think we need to understand peace is harmony, and living in harmony is a wonderful thing itself. But I do believe that until we are able to create a perfect society where people do live in harmony and they don't fight and kill each other, until then, some violence is unavoidable and perhaps somewhat necessary. But unfortunately, we use excessive violence in every situation, and that shouldn't be the case. One example that I can give you is 9/11. Now, what happened in 9/11 and what we did after that, what President Bush did and got us embroiled in a war that we can't put an end to, was a wrong thing. I wrote an article at that time which nobody wanted to print, and it just remained on my desk. And the theme of that article was that this is not the time for us to seek revenge. It is the time for us to do some introspection, to find out why these people did what they did, what motivated them, and why are they so angry with us to have done this kind of thing, and what can we do to improve our relationships with that part of the world. But instead of that, we went out in seeking revenge, and now we are embroiled in a war that we can't end. But on the flip side, what the passengers in that ill-fated plane that crashed in Pittsburgh on 9/11, what they did, in my opinion, is the greatest act of nonviolence. Because they saw what these terrorists were about to do. And they said, we are going to sacrifice our lives, but we are going to stop them from harming other people. And they fought with the terrorists and made it impossible for them to achieve their mission. So in that sense, I would consider that to be a very noble act of nonviolence.
Mr. Gandhi, it's the stated goal of many governments around the world to bring the majority of their populations into the middle class. I recently learned at a colloquium with the US ambassador from Australia that the middle class is not an economic standard, but a level of consumption. Do you think there is a practical way that with this increase in demand for our resources, we can have nonviolent competition?
We can live non-violently. We can have peaceful competition between people. We don't have to be competitive in the sense of destroying each other. That killer instinct that we talk about, we don't need killer instinct. We need some healthy, friendly competition with each other, and we can do that. And it was done in the past. When we had industries, small industries and small businesses. Today we have enlarged everything and made huge multinational corporations who serve nobody except their shareholders. They're only interested in profits, they're not interested in people. And that's where all the problems begin. That if a corporation is there just to make money and make profits, and they don't care about the people and the living of the people, standard of the people, then that's not a healthy business tactic.
We do have to look for practical solutions.
Practical, I think it's more practical to live in harmony, earning smaller profits than making billions of dollars in profits.
First, I'd like to thank you for your talk. And secondly, I appreciate your story of the king and the sage. And I understand that peace and harmony begins in the home in the way that we raise our children. My question is, while this works in the microcosm, how do we translate it to the macrocosm?
Well, anything that starts small eventually grows. And if we are able to practice it ourselves, we influence others. We influence our own children, we influence our neighbors, and it has that ripple effect and it grows on its own. We don't have to go and change the world first and then change ourselves. The change has to take that ripple effect and grow from within us outside.
My question, Mr. Gandhi, is in regards to something that maybe not everybody is much aware of, but the violence that exists in India towards women. So, in regards to the nonviolence, what do you think should happen in India? What steps should be taken to stop the violence that occurs over there towards women? And I was wondering if you've done anything personally in that aspect.
Well, certainly there are lots that needs to be done in India. We need to understand each other. The men in India need to be more respectful towards the women. We should not treat women like second-class citizens or slaves as we do today. They are equal partners and we should treat them as equal partners. And it's when we men begin to practice that towards the women, then we will not harm them and abuse them, but we'll treat them with equal respect. So it's that mindset that we have that has caused all this problem, where men are more important than women are not.
And I agree with you to a full extent in that regard. But then once again, in India, what steps need to be taken so that that'll happen, since it is very much a cultural issue over there?
Well, I think
actually
it's
all
a
over the
question
world.
of education. I think, unfortunately, everywhere we think education is just going to schools and colleges and getting our degree, and then our education is over. That is not over. Education begins after you leave college, not after you, it doesn't end when you leave college. So education is a lifelong experience, but you can learn from life only if you have an open mind and are willing to learn from every person you meet and every incident you face. If you don't have that open mind, then you will never learn anything at all. And my grandfather used to always say that your mind must be like a room with many windows. Let the breeze flow in from all the windows, but refuse to be blown away by any one of them.
You've talked wonderfully about your grandfather, but I was wondering if you remember anything about your grandmother, and you can comment about their relationship and what you remember about her.
Well, I don't remember much about my grandmother because she died in 1944. And the last time I saw her was when I was 6 years old. And the little that I think I remember, I don't know whether it's my own memory or it's what my parents told me about her, but she was a very kind and loving grandmother, and I have a very strong sweet tooth. And grandfather, of course, had no room for any sweets in his diet. And so in the ashram, when we lived there were never any desserts available there. But grandmother ensured that I had something. She would privately make it at home and keep it. And after lunch and dinner, she would quietly call me into her room and give me these little sweet balls. And so I remember that. But I also, I was very pained when I grew up and I saw that so many books had been written about grandfather, but nobody had written anything about grandmother. And so my wife and I spent many years researching her life. And we couldn't find any written material, so we had to depend a lot on oral history. And we went and interviewed people who had lived with her and met her and had known her. And we pieced together a biography of hers, which is now the only definitive biography of hers available. And I've titled it The Forgotten Woman. And one thing that I found was that, and my grandfather acknowledged this, that he learned his first lesson in nonviolence from her. As you probably know, both of them were 13 years old when they were married. In that time, that was common in India. But they started living together at the age of 16. And at that age, grandfather says he didn't know who was going to be the boss, who was going to lay down the rules and enforce them. So he went to the library and started reading books on the subject, and all these books were written by male chauvinists because all of them talked about how the husband should lay down the rules and enforce them strictly. So after reading one of these books, he came home one evening and he told grandmother, he said, "From tomorrow, you're not going to stir out of the house without my permission. That is the law and you're going to obey it, and I want no arguments about it." And of course, grandmother didn't say anything, didn't retort, didn't respond to him. She just quietly went to sleep, got up the next day, and she continued to do what she always did. Continued to go out and visit and never bothered to get his permission. And a few days later, when he realized that she was not obeying him, he confronted her again and he says, "How dare you disobey me? Didn't I tell you that you are not to stir out of the house without my permission?" And at that point, very quietly, without raising her voice or getting angry or anything, very quietly she said, "I was brought up to believe that we must always respect the elders in the house. And I believe that the elders in this house are your parents. Now, if you're trying to tell me that I shouldn't listen to your mother but listen to you, let me know so that I can go and tell your mother I'm not going to obey you anymore." And of course, grandfather couldn't tell her to do that, and so the whole matter was settled without anybody losing their anger or breaking up a relationship. And grandfather acknowledges that that was the most profound lesson in nonviolent conflict resolution that he learned there.
I come from advertising and marketing background, and one thing I have noticed is there is very little talked about in media about peace. I mean, CNN has war correspondent, White House has situation room, but really nobody has a center for peace or a peace calculator as to how long we have gone without fighting. Or I mean, it's not cool. Why? How can we market and promote peace?
We can't market peace, we have to live peace. And it's only through our lives, living it ourselves, that we can influence others. It's not a commodity that we can market and advertise and do that. Violence can be done that way. We can advertise violence and make it very, materially beneficial kind of thing. And that's what happens today. In 1953, President Eisenhower warned us about the military-industrial complex, and we didn't listen to him, and today we are paying the price for it. The military-industrial complex has become so strong that they produce weapons of destruction, and somebody has to use them. They have to be sold. And so they thrive on conflicts everywhere. And they sell their weapons and make money and make profits out of it. And that's not what we need. And that's why I said what we need is a complete transformation of our culture of violence to a culture of nonviolence.
And do you have any tools for that? Do you have any tools to promote peace?
Tools are love, respect, understanding, and acceptance. When we love each other and respect each other and are willing to accept and appreciate each other for who we are as human beings, then we will create the groundwork for peace to be built.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your comments. They were very insightful. I want to ask you something that comes up a lot in arguments me and my friends have, and that is, how can we apply what you have said at the national level in like international relations? How can an elected official employ these nonviolent methods when any decision made could result in the death of his or her constituents? When power can so readily protect your country and its people, how can an official take that leap of faith?
Well, we have to begin with ourselves. We think that change can come from the top down. That doesn't happen. After all, the politicians we send to rule over us are people from society, people like you and me. We elect them and send them there. They don't do their work there, that is a different matter. But, the tragedy here is we really don't have a democracy. We have a dollarcracy. It's only those who have a lot of money can benefit from the government. And we see that the government works for the big lobbyists with a lot of money. They don't listen to common people like you and me. And that's a tragedy. That's not democracy. So we need to change that. And that change can come only when we change. And through our change, we eventually have more responsible politicians who will work for the people and not work for lobbyists. Thank you.